Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another hashtag event icons. Will Kern from Endless Events here today. Thank you, all you awesome people out in the live stream audience. Today, we are talking about sponsorships, exhibitions. How do we take this huge revenue source that we've had for in-person events for so long, and how do we monetize it now for virtual events moving forward? Well, I can't talk about this all day long, so I brought in Peter Puhl, who is one of the most incredible sponsorship experts in the entire events industry, who will totally blow your guys' mind. He's been here before, so let's go ahead and jump right on into this week's hashtag event icons.
It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons.
Presented by Endless Events.
The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything.
Just go to www.event-icons.com to ask questions.
Our iconic guests will answer them live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better the conversation. So please help share Hashtag Event Icons
on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com.
Now, without any further delay, this is Hashtag Event Icons.
All right, we got to jump right on into this as soon as possible because I think you guys are going to have a lot of questions for our guest today. So I want to go ahead and bring him on into the chat. Peter, thank you so much for joining today. If no one remembers Peter before, he's been on Event Icons, I think, 4 or 5 times now. Last episode was episode 150. Last year, talking about sponsorship and the state of sponsorship with events in 2019. Well, it's 2020 now. We got to talk about the state of sponsorships in virtual events. So, Peter, real quick, give everyone a quick update. What have you been up to since we had you on the show last?
Well, thank you very much first for having me. It's a pleasure being again with you. I love your show. It's always one of the highlights, and I can really recommend to everyone just to tune in because it's simply great. Yeah, what has happened since the last time I was in the show? A lot has happened, actually. We keep on developing Sponsor My Event, which is my platform. We have been growing quite a lot, and we always try to keep up also with the latest trends. We see that even before now this whole crisis, the event world became much more virtual, so you have more and more requests actually for virtual events, be it on YouTube channels, etc., for requests, so that actually the whole situation now where we are shifting to virtual events doesn't really come as a big surprise now, so we're quite prepared for it. But still, it was an intense year, and with the typical ups and downs that you can have if you're an entrepreneur, especially if you're just launching a marketplace, which is something I would never recommend to any startup guy actually to launch a marketplace. It's
Don't set up a sponsorship marketplace for event planners to find sponsorships. Don't ever do it. Well, you already took the idea, and you already made the best platform for it anyways.
We try to do as good as we can. So the best, definitely not yet, but we are working on it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm sure, audience, you guys are going to have a ton of questions for Peter. He is a pro when it comes to sponsorship, as I've said before. We'll definitely go back and listen to the episode so you can learn some of his tactics and tips that he has for general sponsorships. I'm sure some of it will bubble up as we go along. But let's dive on in. I love how you said that this virtual event thing isn't quite 100% the newest thing ever, that everyone's been looking at, like, how do they sponsor digital assets and everything like that as well. Kind of tell me a little bit about, and from the in-person event change to the virtual event change, what had you started seeing before this all happened when it comes to sponsorships for virtual events and things like that? Tell us a little bit about what has changed in the last 2 weeks or so.
Well, the last 2 weeks clearly have been totally disruptive for the whole industry. I mean, what we have seen, first of all, before the whole crisis started, we have seen that more and more requests were coming in from kind of virtual events where people said, yeah, we're making a podcast, we're making a YouTube channel, etc. All these things, less maybe for virtual conferences, but still. And people were starting to get used actually also to do these requests. At the same time, also for sponsors, this was still something which was a little bit uncommon. So they didn't know really how to handle this and how to deal with virtual events, because it was still something which is a little bit new kind of for the sponsors. So especially when it comes to the smaller sponsorships, then this might be quite difficult actually, because they don't have the experience. Now, of course, over the last 2 weeks, this was a total disruption because nobody could have expected what happened. And we have seen, of course, a total uncertainty on both sides. On one hand, we have almost all the events now in the US, which have been over the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, which have been literally canceled. Then at the same time, also sponsors are in the situation that they are not simply allowed even to commit to any sponsorship anymore, because it's for the moment unpredictable when the situation will change. And then at the same time, we see this dynamism developing into shifting to the virtual world, sponsors adapting to this, just getting used to it, and seeing kind of also even an opportunity in the virtual sponsorships that they haven't seen before. So it's really kind of a learning curve that we see for the moment, where we see that both organizers on one hand, but also the sponsors on the other hand, have to learn a tremendous amount how to deal actually with virtual sponsorships, because they have either never done it before or simply have neglected it because they didn't have to do it before.
Oh, I think that's so smart that it's been there, but we've kind of neglected it and left it a little bit on the backside. Like I kind of made up the statistic, but I'm sure there's actually some numbers out there, and I'll eventually find them. Is like virtual events represent like maybe like 1% of the whole event market, but now it's 100% of the market out there. So we have to figure out what we're gonna do and how we're gonna evolve as we come along. So again, audience out there in the live sphere, if you have questions about sponsorships, go ahead and leave them in the chat. Get them in now versus waiting later, because we get a ton of questions at the end. I want to make sure that we get those questions in early. So if you have questions about it, go ahead and leave it. Peter's going to be answering them. So first question that I kind of have for you, when it comes to virtual event sponsorships, I think the number one question I have is, what is possible? So maybe tell us, I mean, some ideas, get people kind of stirring. What sort of things are possible when it comes to these virtual events?
Well, the good news about virtual sponsorship is actually that it can be much more compelling, much more interactive, and much more engaging also when it comes to these sponsorships. The reason why is simply in the old world, in the old-fashioned world of sponsorship, it was very easy just simply to satisfy a sponsor by hanging somewhere a logo and just doing it. Of course, you can replicate the same also into the virtual world, but what's really compelling is actually just to make this much more interesting by giving the sponsors a possibility to get really into the show, to participate kind of in the show. Let's take a real example of a conference. Let's suppose you are going to organize a virtual conference. You might have several speakers, you might have even several rooms. So if you have the right software to do this, you could, for example, give to your sponsors a possibility to run a certain workshop in a dedicated room, to connect directly with the audience, to provide the added value that the sponsor actually should also provide. And all this can be done in a rather easy and simple way, because you don't need to allocate a physical room for it. You can do it virtually. So you will give the possibilities as a sponsor to do things that he could eventually not have done before, simply because you have the technical means to do it now. If you give the sponsor as a possibility, for example, just to show a video, to live chat directly with people, that's something which is pretty amazing what you can do. At the same time, also, what is another possibility, if you're running a show, if you're running a conference or whatever, you can perfectly also give the possibility to the sponsor to make a kind of a product placement, or you're going to speak during the show about his product. What is possible if you have, for example, a virtual product? You can include it. You can say, we're going to have here some screenshots of it. We're going to show you how it works. So all this can be negotiated with the sponsor and gives opportunities that sometimes in a normal event you would not even have had. And this is only kind of the tip of the iceberg of the activations that you might have in the virtual world. So I see it rather from a very positive side. And I say we have plenty of new opportunities and possibilities what you can do in this virtual world. And it's, to be really honest, we're even only at the beginning to really fully explore what can be done. And the key at the end of the day is always the same. You need to see your sponsor really as kind of a partner that you include in your event, so that you have someone that you can work with building your event and making this event a success. So that's kind of key for the success.
That's incredible. I think you have such a wise opinion too of saying like before if we wanted to, for example, create a space, an individual quiet room where where the sponsor could talk to attendees, and attendees could just kind of pop in. You would have to literally rent out another room, and it might have cost you, X amount of dollars on your hotel contract. Where now it's like, okay, I can set that up, and in theory, it should be free to create unlimited amount of rooms that people can kind of pop in and out of, which I think is smart. And I also love your analogy too of saying like, look at what's in person and then trying to figure out, hey, is this possible virtually as well? Like a room is what we kind of think of in the physical space. Well, maybe what the room is a video call or something like that as well. I think that's super duper cool. Man, I have lots and lots of questions as well. Here we go. We got a question already coming on in. So Christina Lowenfield. Christina asks on LinkedIn, I've heard of a virtual giveaway bags. Have you had any experience with them? Do you think they work well, and everything like that? So maybe talk a little bit about the effectiveness of maybe giveaway bags in person, and then maybe how you think they might change virtually as well.
Sure. Well, these typical swag bags, as we call them, that's something which is around, I think, as long as events exist. So you have these swag bags. They work typically quite well, but of course it depends what you're putting in there. If you're just putting kind of a pencil in there or just a notebook or whatever, these are the things which usually at home you might look at them and then unfortunately, you either use them or you throw them away, but they are not going to create kind of lasting memory. So the success of any swag bag depends heavily on how you actually see the things that you put in. If you, as a sponsor, you put in something which is interesting, which is compelling, then you will succeed. Then a swag bag, of course, makes sense. I would say, in general, that a swag bag for a normal event always made sense also to do it, because it's a rather inexpensive way for certain sponsors to get into the ring, to get in front of the people. On the other hand, you as an event organizer, if the swag bag is well composed, you can also give something to your attendees, which is indeed fun. Now, transferring this to the digital age, that's also not an idea which is new. I mean, digital swag bags have existed since a longer time, and they have been around also even for normal physical events. So I remember that we were exploring, kind of because of curiosity, already a couple of years ago, certain technologies or certain sites which were proposing these digital swag bags for your event. The possibilities that you have for these digital swag bags are, of course, extremely interesting, because first of all, you can have a swag bag which is much bigger. So a digital swag bag is not constrained by any physical dimensions. At the same time, also, it depends again on the creativity of the sponsor who's going to put something in the swag bag. You can give them kind of the platform, but at the same time, you need to insist also that the sponsor is doing something which is interesting with the swag bags. And as it's online, it always relies on kind of resources that you're linking to or that you're providing to. So if the sponsor takes the time and builds up some resources which are interesting, where he provides through the swag bag eventually some added value, then this can be an absolute advantage. So, and again, as these digital swag bags have not been around only now since 2 or 3 weeks, but already since a couple of years, they are quite a standard, I would say, in the event industry. So you can perfectly use them also for your virtual events, and they should work perfectly well also here. So, and the functioning of it is quite simple. So everybody who's registering for the event itself will automatically receive the swag bags. So that's typically not very difficult. Plus, also the biggest benefit of the swag bags in the digital world is setting them up is super easy. You don't need to provide any physical bags. You don't need to provide anything which is physical, and you can just fill in as much as you want, which is also beneficial, of course, because you can propose to much more sponsors also simply to put their items or gadgets or whatever they want to put in this digital swag bag.
I think that's incredible. I think too, like there's also the potential that you can theory actually still make a swag bag and have people assemble them and then ship them out to people too as well, right? Versus
Absolutely.
just the digital side. But obviously, like if we're going digital, let's go all digital, right? Potentially. I mean, I think you're right. If a digital virtual swag bag said something like, hey, schedule a sales consult with me, I might be like, oh, what the hell? I'm not going to click that. But if it said something like, hey, if you sign up for our service, we'll give you 6 months free to try it out, I might be like, oh, cool. Like I was already interested in this. I'm excited to give this free the trial out. It's fantastic. I love the idea. The chat is just blowing up right now with questions already coming on in. Shout outs to everybody who's watching right now. Mark, Christina, Ashley. Let's see who else we got. Another Mark, Catherine, Jihu, I think is how you say your name. Marie, Mike, Janice, you guys are awesome. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Keep those questions coming. So, I got there's a couple questions coming in that I'm going to save a little for in just a second. But you kind of talk a little bit about how can you convince. Actually, let's combine these questions. So the question's actually coming on in from Ashley, who's asking, how do you convince potential sponsors to invest when right now the economy is so uncertain and people are not sure how to spend the money and what's possible and things like that? And at the same time, too, maybe we pivot that too as well towards virtual events. So when everything's so uncertain right now, what are you seeing from sponsors? Are they certain? Are people still committing? What are you seeing out there?
For the moment, it's really a difficult situation. I think there is no beating around the bush. There is total uncertainty on the sponsor side, and it doesn't matter now if you're talking about virtual events or real events. For the moment now, at least for these 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, where nobody knows exactly, to be honest, in what direction it's going to go. The time to find a sponsor is quite hard. So we have seen now for the moment that the whole market for sponsorships on Sponsor My Event, to be really honest, has completely crashed for the moment, because for the moment, it seems that everybody is on standby. The situation for the companies is that they are not allowed even to commit. I was 1 week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I was in 2 calls where we had one big insurance company and a big real estate company. They wanted to absolutely go into one event, which was in Seattle. The other one was taking place in Hawaii. They wanted to go into these 2 events. And the problem is, it was just exactly the day that we had the call with the organizer. They got the message from their companies, no commitment anymore for an undefined time. So everything was put on hold for them. So that was the biggest problem that we had for the moment. I believe that now is the right moment just to keep in touch with sponsors, reach out to them still, and just get them interested in your events. Also, especially if you're planning to have virtual events, because business goes on. I mean, it's not that that business simply stops. And there is a need also for these companies to have visibility. So let's see it from the positive way. We have a market which is, for the moment, very complicated. At the same time, the market is also complicated for sponsors, and brands need to kind of communicate in these times also, just simply to make sure that their businesses keep on running. So if you as an event organizer can propose them the virtual event, which might be very compelling because you might have a lot of attendees for your event, then this might be even successful. But I would not bet for the moment on it that you will have tons of sponsors, for the pure reason that they might have internal guidelines that they simply are not allowed to commit for your event. At the same time, I would say just don't stop now your activities reaching out to sponsors. I mean, do everything possible to find your sponsors, reach out to the sponsors, speak with the sponsors. They might tell you for the moment that they cannot commit, but still you have already your foot in the door and you can use it on a later moment when you will be ready and when they will be ready as well, just simply to unlock the sponsorship. So the time might be difficult, but there is also hope that this will change again. But still, as I said at the beginning, there is no beating around the bush. It's a difficult time for sponsorship. And at the same time, I believe if you're persistent and you're really, really discussing with the sponsors, coming up with really interesting, compelling ideas, and if you can prove them also that you shift your event to the virtual world, that this event will take place, that it will attract a lot of people, then the same rules at the end of the day apply as for a normal physical event. You just need to make the sale and you need to convince your sponsor, because you have the product, which is your event, you have the sponsor, which is your client, and now you need to sell, you need to bring in the deal, and that's it. So nothing has changed actually from this perspective.
That's awesome. I love your perspective of saying too that it don't just say no, the chips are down, things are bad. Let's just pause on sponsorships. So instead, still work on them, because yeah, they might not be ready to buy right now, but they will eventually. And don't you want to be there at the front, who's been talking to them already for months and build that relationship with them, rather than just like trying to hit them up once times get better, for example. I think that's so wise and very, very smart. So Jeff Frank in the audience, I wanted to read his comment. He says, results, effectiveness using previous quantitative and qualitative data show how your event reached the right demo and moves the needle. I think that's super duper smart, Jeff. So Peter, that kind of brings up a question, which is when it comes to virtual events, how can people collect the right data, and what sort of opportunities exist around data for virtual events?
Well, that's actually the fun thing, or the really great thing about virtual events. Collecting data in the virtual world is so much easier depending on what platform you're using for your event, rather than collecting these data if you have a normal physical event. It's always kind of a struggle, I think, for every event organizer and every sponsor to collect enough data if you have a real physical event, because the people might come, they might go. You don't know exactly who it was. You don't have the contact of it. You don't know what kind of interaction these people had during your event, what they were looking at, what they were watching at. So it's kind of not mission impossible, I would not say, because there are very good tracking systems also for real life sponsorship. But on the other hand, if you go to the virtual world, there you can technically, depending on what system you're using, you can technically trace every single movement of your attendee, every single interaction. You can provide all these data later on in anonymous form, of course. You can provide it to your sponsor, and that's something which is absolutely interesting. I had last week, for example, I had a podcast with the CEO and the founder of Glisser, which is a conference system to engage with the audience through slide sharing, Q&As, polls, live streaming, and et cetera, et cetera. And he also had a whole set built in his software in Glisser, and that's only one example. All similar softwares which are doing the same are probably very comparable. He had a whole system built in where he was tracking all these data, and all these data can be later on handed over to sponsor, so that the sponsor can exactly see how successful his sponsorship was. And that's something which is so valuable for every sponsor, because many organizers forget from time to time that the sponsor, he wants to do one thing at your event. He wants to create leads and he wants to sell. So he wants to increase his sales, and he wants to generate a positive return of investment. If you have an event organizer, you have the possibility, by using the right software to virtualize your events, to provide data which are showing to the sponsor that his sponsorship was a success and that his money was well invested. Then you're absolutely on a winning side. So that's another benefit that I see from virtual events, because you have this whole traceability that otherwise would be very difficult, actually. So it's plenty of data. One thing which is always very important, you need to be very careful not to disclose any data which are confidential. So you cannot just simply give out email addresses from your attendees to some sponsors if you don't have the explicit authorization to do it, for example. So with these things, you need to be extremely careful. But for all the rest, actually, virtual events are kind of a pot of luck, actually, a pot of gold, actually, for data mining.
That's awesome. I think you pivoted perfectly to the next question I was going to ask. I was like, getting set up for it, and then you literally transitioned perfectly. So I want to jump right on into that. So about data privacy. So one thing is, I think you're probably way ahead of this than we are in the States, because for those who don't know, Peter's based in Luxembourg. And so obviously you guys have GDPR, right? That's hit
Absolutely.
the EU, and it's very, very important. And data privacy is incredibly important right now. How can we make sure that we toe the right balance between privacy and also giving sponsors what they need? What sort of things should people be thinking about?
Well, indeed, here in Europe, for us, it's a little bit easier, because with GDPR, you're kind of forced to respect data privacy, which I personally believe is something which is extremely valuable and extremely important for each and everyone. If you're in America, where we are also mostly active with Sponsor My Event, then you don't have these data protection rules. But still, I feel that it's an obligation for each and everyone to respect these data protection rules. So it's definitely not a bad thing just to read before you start your virtual events, to read a little bit what GDPR is about and what kind of rules are applied in Europe, and maybe to think if it would not be fair enough also to apply similar rules also simply for your event without being forced to do so, but just also highlight that you value the privacy of the people. Today, people are quite aware of what's happening with their data. I mean, we had in the last year, we had the whole problems with Facebook. We had so many privacy breaches also overall, so that people are much more careful where they're going to put their private data. If you, as an event organizer, if you can make sure also that they feel secure and that they know that you're respecting their privacy, then you might have also very happy attendees. So that's something which I personally would recommend. So inspire yourself basically from what is done here in Europe. At the same time, apply these rules also to your events, but also make sure that you're completely transparent with what's happening. I mean, transparency is basically always a key to success when it comes to privacy, because if you can explain to your people what happens with their data, and if you make sure that also these things are respected, then your attendees, they will be happy with it and they will trust you also. And trust is something which is difficult to build. If once you have lost this trust, to regain the trust of the people is almost mission impossible. It will take years, if at all, you will get it back. So that's why right from the beginning, be transparent, be honest with the people, and respect certain guidelines that also kind of you should feel yourself. I mean, it should be self-understanding that you simply cannot, without the prior approval of any attendee, you cannot simply just give his private data to some sponsor. I mean, that's something which should be understood, that this is not possible. And if you just apply a little bit normal human behavior, then this should not be such a big obstacle.
Whoa. Dropping the knowledge, and I think the ethics with it too is so smart, because you, like, far too often I think that we think, well, should I do this? Should I do this? But it's also about like the culture of your organization and making sure that that permission is rampant and very huge part of it as well, which is fantastic. Great question kind of coming in right now. Mark is asking, do you think that the after phase of physical sponsorships is exciting for companies? He says, I'm sure you have to enhance your sponsorship packages with innovative digital solutions, right? Anyways. So do you think that sponsors are getting companies really excited about what's potentially available? What are you kind of seeing out there?
I believe that it's always kind of a collaboration, let's say like this. If you have companies can be excited about sponsorship if they feel that the sponsorship is in the right hands with the event organizer, and if the event organizer comes up also with interesting ideas for activation. If it's just simply to execute the sponsorship, just if the sponsor feels literally as being a cash cow, then this is never a good start. If the sponsor has a good feeling right from the beginning that he's considered being a partner, and that the organizer also takes his time to work together with the event sponsor just to create interesting activations which are bringing this added value not only to the sponsor, not only to the organizer, but also to the attendees, then right away the sponsor will feel comfortable. The brand will feel comfortable also. So that's something which is very important. Then at the same time, this has also the impact, of course, on the audience. Very often, if you take the classic sponsorship, very often actually sponsors are just there and everybody knows, oh, they were giving some money and that's why they have the possibility to hang the logo there. If the attendee has a feeling, okay, here is a sponsor who really contributed to the success of the event, and it doesn't matter now if it's a virtual event or if it's a real event, doesn't matter actually. But if this feeling comes from the attendee, that he has a feeling, oh yeah, this sponsor really contributed and made something interesting so that this event became a little bit better as it would have been without the sponsor, then absolutely this is a success. So that's kind of the secret sauce also to keep both your attendees happy with the sponsorship, and at the same time also keeping your brands happy when they are executing the sponsorship.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to ask a hard question because I'm sure you're still working through this as well. When it comes to sponsorships, I think people kind of had an idea of like the tiered system and knew how to price it. How do people moving forward, what's the best strategies they have for pricing these sponsorships and selling them? So then that way they know, like, what's the value for this? What's the value for that? What's kind of your thought process around pricing of sponsorships?
pricing of sponsorship is definitely a science of it all. So I think we could probably make 10 webinars and still would not cover everything about the pricing. To price a sponsorship correctly, there is not a big difference, I would say, between a virtual event and a real event. Let's start with this. So there are certain factors that you need to keep in mind when it comes to pricing your sponsorship packages. Actually, I'm not a big friend of sponsorship packages because sponsorship is something which should be flexible and should be actually tailor-made for each sponsor. But still, at the end of the day, it's not a bad idea to come up with certain predefined packages so that you can give to your brand who wants to sponsor certain ideas what could be possible. So that's a good starting point. Now, when it comes to the pricing, you need to see certain factors. The brand always comes in and the brand wants to sell. So let's suppose that you have someone who's selling a product which is worth $5,000. If you have an audience of 200 people, and you're asking for the sponsorship, let's say $2,000, and the company knows, oh, from these 200 attendees, I'm going to potentially maybe sell to 10%. So that would come down to something like 20 people. So if they sell really to these 20 people, or let's say like this, 20 people are going to be leads, they're going to sell to 1 or 2. Then they were going to sell the product maybe for $5,000. So they would sell to 2 people. It would come to $10,000 that they're going to make as a revenue. Let's say they have also production costs, etc., and here and there. So they had costs for the sponsorship of $2,000. They have sold for $10,000, maybe a benefit profit of let's say $4,000 or $5,000. So in this case, the return of investment would have been possible. It would have been roughly twice of what they have invested, which is actually not a bad ratio in this case. Then this would make sense. So in this case, you can suppose that your sponsorship that you price at $2,000 is actually correctly priced, and you could have eventually even asked for a little bit more. What I want to explain with this little calculation is simply, you need to put yourself into the position of the sponsor, and you need to understand what the sponsor actually is going to sell, and if it's possible through your audience that you have for the sponsor to generate enough revenue so that his return of investment will be positive. And if you make this exercise, and it's a rather simple calculation, if you have kind of an idea of what revenues the sponsor can generate through your event, then you will find the key also how to price your sponsorship packages. Then, of course, are coming certain factors which are combining. So first of all, you need to see how many guaranteed attendees will you have. I mean, you need to know as much as close as possible how many people you're going to have, because that's probably the determining factor. At the same time, you need to know also what kind of buying power have these people. What kind of disposable income do they have? Are they able to afford what the sponsor is going to sell? Only if you know that, you can also tell to the sponsor, I can justify my price for this package because I know that the audience that I have has enough disposable income to buy the product that you have. If you're going to ask, for example, Rolex to sponsor your event, and you're going to ask them to put $10,000 in, but your attendees simply don't have the disposable income to buy a Rolex, then this is a mission impossible. Very simple. At the same time, you need to see also how the brand actually can be in. The brand will see also how long actually you have been on the market. What kind of experience do you have? You need to show to the brand that you are able also to get to the brand this visibility. If you can show it to them, then your sponsorship packages can be also higher, because the brand will know for sure this person is able to make this a success. So we are going to willing also to pay a little bit more money for the sponsorship, because we know that there is a certain guarantee that this will be a success. So it's a very complex topic actually to find the right price for it. Very often I see also that sponsors, that organizers are pricing their packages, especially at the beginning when they are first-time event organizers, maybe too low, because they feel like, oh, we cannot ask so much for it. So that's why it can really help to sit down and to make these calculations. Make the calculation regarding the return of investment from the sponsor. On the other hand, also make the calculation for yourself. How much money do you need to successfully run your event? And there we have, of course, we have the comfortable situation that virtual events can be eventually cheaper than organizing a real event because you don't have the whole overhead that you need to rent kind of a location somewhere, a venue, etc., all these things. But for sure, if you're doing it also really well, it can be also quite expensive. All these things need to go into your calculations so that you can come up with a considerable amount of good prices also for your sponsorship packages. I know it's a tough topic. I know.
No, it's
I
good.
know.
It was so good. No, I love the conversation almost looking at like a funnel too, that you need to be able to talk to your sponsors to figure out what they're selling. And like you said, almost be in their mind thinking about what their ROI is going to be for you to determine how you're going to set your pricing as well. I think that's so smart to do. And I think that you hit a nail on the head, which is that we also need to talk to our sponsors more and gather feedback. Because I think right now people might say, well, I don't know what my sponsors are selling. I don't know how much it's valuable. I don't know what their conversion rates are at these conferences or this virtual events on here as well. But if you talk to them, and survey them maybe before you set your pricing packages, you might be able to collect some better data to be able to settle in on the right market, which I love that. I think the more that we can talk to our customers, the better. I think it's fantastic. Absolutely. So the question was, what examples of the most successful virtual assets and what have sponsored like the most when it comes to virtual assets, essentially?
Well, clearly the biggest asset is actually the direct communication and the engagement that a sponsor can have with the audience. And that's true just as much for normal events, for real life events, as also for virtual events. Because that's actually what the sponsor wants. They want not only to be virtually present there, but they want to have the possibility to communicate with the people, to get into contact with the people, and to build a long-lasting relationship with the people. Because that's really what matters. They want to know that these people who have been in contact with the sponsor later on, that they are going to get back to the sponsor, that the sponsor can work with them on a long-term basis just to convert them from leads into prospects into clients. So that's something which is so important. And that's why I would say the biggest asset clearly for any sponsor is the possibility to interact with the audience. And that's true, both for normal events as also for virtual events.
That's incredible. What do you think is the non-spammy and salesy way that people can do the direct communication? Because right, like especially right now too, like you don't want to make it so like all of a sudden they can just start putting stuff on attendees' calendars. You know, you also don't want to make it where you're just allowing the sponsors to be able to directly email them. What do you think is the best approach for being able to create a non-spammy direct communication?
Very simple, just providing and creating added value. If you are providing this added value, something that the attendee likes, something that where he believes this is useful for me, something where he says right away, I would like to know more about this, then it will not be a problem for any attendee just to say, oh, okay, I'm going to be happily giving my email address to stay in touch with the sponsor. So that's something which is key to it. Just create this added value. If it's just forcing someone, or in worst case, tricking someone and giving to the email address so that all of a sudden he will receive unsolicited emails from a sponsor, that's definitely the wrong way. But instead, I mean, you know it also from yourself, everybody has been in the situation that he has seen something which was interesting and he said, wow, I said also, I want to know a little bit more about this. I was more than happy actually giving my email address because I was engaged. I wanted to have more information about this. And that's the same for sponsorship. So if you have an offer, an activation, which is compelling, which makes sense, where every attendee says, this is something which is for me, then they will give the email address or stay in touch with a sponsor.
I like it. I think you're right. Like people, if they really want something, they will ask for it. And you just have to give them kind of the means to be able to do that as well, whether it's a contact form or maybe a button to opt in or whatever it may look like on that side of things. I'm trying to remember some of the questions that we also had coming in. We had so many comments come in right before everything happened. What sort of I guess let's tip the hat on the other side. What sort of activations have you seen that are so common that just completely fail? That you're like, people just need, like the biggest things that people need to stop doing that you think, especially on the virtual side of things?
Well, One thing that happens so often, you have kind of this typical box where someone says, yeah, put your email, your business card in here in this box like this. We're going to draw some prize. And so people are doing it. That's okay. But it's not something where I would say this is an activation which really works. People do it because for sure they want to win the prize, but they don't want to receive any additional information. So that's something which is for me kind of a no-go anymore to do it. If you do it something similar on a website, just asking people bluntly just to give their email address without providing this added value, that comes to the same. So people will eventually give it, but they will not want to give it really. And at the same time also, if you're forcing people just to give their email address because you just want to give them something just in return for an email address, that's also not necessarily a good idea. So it needs to be kind of a healthy balance between something where you say, I ask the people for their email address because I want them also really to give their email address, and providing something which is maybe also something for free as a little teaser, so that you can show also I'm providing added value and not only kind of some spammy messages.
I like that. I think the mass giveaway needs to die. The
Totally.
oh hey yeah, you come iPad giveaways, drone giveaways, like all those things like that. I'm just tired of seeing it, I think, as well, because it just becomes that people are really signing up for it to get the free stuff. They don't really care about your offerings or what you have to have. I don't think there's been ever a giveaway where I've been like, oh, I'm also really excited about this product. I hope a salesperson reaches out to me, and this through this giveaway, or I hope I just get on this newsletter for the next 6 indefinite years of my life while they send out emails. I think I think that's important, and that's one thing I think also needs to die too, is like the putting you on an email newsletter if you didn't opt in. I know we talked about GDPR, but I'm just like, my email gets blown up, and I'm like, if I get a newsletter that instantly I didn't sign up for, and especially if I just because I had a conversation with somebody once, I hate it. I'm like, come on, people, can't we just be in this pure opt-in world right now? Like, at Endless, we require that you have to actually say, like, I want to start getting newsletter, regular emails. We might send you some emails to say, like, here's some complimentary offers and things like that as well. But we stop after like a week because we just want to give you the information you need. And then if you want more, you can always come back and get more as well. All right. So I have a couple more questions. So I'm gonna lead on one that I think is gonna give you a chance to brainstorm. Peter, let's say we're looking forward in 10 years from now. Where do you think virtual event sponsorships can go, and where do you think what do you think is possible in the future when it comes to virtual events that maybe not even happening right now, but where do you see the future going?
Well, the future is clearly going into a more virtual world. We're going to see new technologies coming up where you have the possibility really with augmented reality to stay at home and at the same time connect some events. One of the key factors that I see which will clearly come is going to be the communication between people. You will be able to be in a virtual room and to really interact with other people. So that's going to come for sure in the next 10 years. There have been already so many attempts in the past which totally failed because simply technology was not ready. But this is going to change. I mean, we see all the main players, they're working for the moment on augmented reality headsets. Apple is rumored actually to bring out one next year or in 2 years. We have other ones. Facebook is massively working also on this. All this will kind of have an impact also on the event industry. So we're going to have more and more virtual events, which are going to feel like physical events, kind of. At the same time, I believe also more now on the short term, that we're going to see a lot of hybrid events. We're going to see, especially now through the crisis, that people have learned how virtual events are organized. They will also see the benefits actually by bringing the virtual world to the real event and to create these hybrid events. And that's something which is not going to go away anymore. We're going to see a lot of conferences, a lot of events where you're going to see that the audience will be composed of people who are going to be physically present. And at the same time, also quite a large number of people who are going to be virtually connected to the events. And we're going to see a lot of new technologies, even though a lot of technologies are existing already, but we're going to see a lot of new technologies which are going to facilitate the communication between the real world and the virtual world. So I think that's definitely the way to go. I don't believe, honestly, that we're going to see now over the next 10 years real world events disappearing. That's not going to happen because it's still too valuable to meet people in person and to speak with people in person. And I'm not sure if now over the next 10 years we're going to see technologies which can fully replace this kind of one-on-one contact, which is kind of a key benefit also for a lot of events. And at the same time, also when we come to music events, concerts, etc., sport events, it's always kind of a different feeling whether you're going to be in front of your screen or even with your headset on it, or if you're going to stand next to other people, you feel the emotions. That's always going to be something which is not going to be able to replace, at least not with the technology that I can foresee over the next 10 years.
Awesome. I love always looking into the future, and I think you're 100% right. I'm there with you 100%. All right, Peter. Got last two questions, the standard event icons questions that I always love to ask. So if you had to pick one single tip that you could give to planners when it comes to sponsorship for virtual events, what would be your one tip for everyone?
The one tip is clearly make it compelling. Make it compelling, first of all, for the sponsor, so that the sponsor has a feeling that he gets an offer which is interesting, that he gets a visibility and activations which make sense to him, so that he has a good feeling that his sponsorship will be perceived in a positive and a good way from the attendees. And then at the same time, make also sure that there is this added value for the attendees. Because if you have happy attendees who are going to see in the sponsor someone who's going to bring this added value, then you're going to have the sponsor happy, you're going to have the attendees happy. So that's definitely something where I would say make sure that this works, creating this added value around the sponsorship, both for the sponsor, both for the attendees, and this will automatically also create the added value for you. So that's clearly the number one tip that I could give to any event organizer. Just invest enough time simply working on this and not just simply making something which is half-hearted and half-baked. It will not work and nobody will be happy with it if you do so.
I love it. All right. Resources, places that people can go to learn more about sponsorship. And, I want to give you a chance to also plug your platform as well, which is awesome. So favorite resources that you go when it comes to learning about sponsorships, what's going on in the world, all that sort of stuff, books, blogs, anything like that, tools, tips, lay it on us.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, let's start with what we do. We're operating Sponsor My Event, which is a marketplace that brings together event organizers and event sponsors. So our mission is actually to bring them together. We're a marketplace, so event organizers can publish their events on sponsormyevent.com. We are matching them actually with matching sponsors, and we also make sure that the whole deal flow will be seamless. So that's something what we're doing. One thing which is totally new and which will be launched only now in the next days or 1 or 2 weeks, we're launching our Sponsor My Event Academy, which is going to be a training for event organizers who are looking to find the right sponsors. We know that Sponsor My Event cannot do everything for the organizer, and a lot of organizers have still to do and look themselves for the sponsors, and that's why we're going to launch this comprehensive training course, which will be approximately 6, 7, 8 hours with a lot of videos, of course, which is going to cover a lot of topics around sponsorship, and this can be found on academy.sponsormyevent.com. The link is not yet active, but it's going to be active from tomorrow on, at least to pre-register for this academy, which is going to be probably one of the most comprehensive and most complete sponsorship resources on the net. When it comes to other resources, I'm a huge fan of powersponsorship.com from Kim Stilton-Reid. She's in Australia, but she's kind of really the goddess actually of sponsorship, and she has a lot of valuable resources. I would really recommend to visit her site to see what kind of resources she has. And then at the same time, it's always a good idea to dive into sales techniques, because finding sponsors and selling your sponsorship to the sponsor is nothing else than selling something. So if you have a solid background in sales techniques, then this will help a lot. That's why I would recommend clearly also dive into the sales world, look for interesting webinars or for interesting resources on the internet about how to sell successfully, because that will help you clearly also to find your sponsors. And then last but not least, also when it comes to finding sponsors, it's always a good idea also to learn how to present yourself and how to pitch in front of sponsors. That's something which is very difficult if you have never done it, if you don't know how to pitch. And I'm from the startup world, so I have learned really the hard way to pitch in front of investors. And that's why I would recommend to each and every organizer also to have a look maybe at startup pitches, how they're doing it. Because if you're able to deliver a really cool and concise elevator pitch to your sponsor, then at least you get the attention also. And then you can later on make a fully qualified pitch as well. This will help. And this can be learned quite well if you connect to resources from the startup world. If you inspire yourself maybe from startup pitches that you can find on YouTube, this is going to be extremely helpful for each and everyone who's going to look for sponsors.
Awesome. We have a question coming kind of in, and I want to make sure that we address it. Carol actually asked us, and thank you, Carol, for asking us again, because I did miss the question the first time, about successful virtual sponsorship case studies that you might have. But I figured probably the Academy plus maybe directly contacting you would be a best bet for that sort of thing. So Peter, if someone's looking to understand successful activations for virtual events, what's the best way for people to reach you?
It's very simple. So peter@sponsormyevent.com. So this is email where I can be reached at any moment. I'm going to reply as soon as I can. So sometimes it might be a little bit overwhelming, especially in these times, but I will try to do my best. And then, of course, I mean, you can also find us on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn if someone wants to add me, just feel free. We're on Facebook as well. And then, of course, the main resource is sponsormyevent.com. And as I said, my email, peter@sponsormyevent.com.
I love it. And we'll probably have to bring you back to do a full case study. Maybe we'll bring down one of your clients to talk about the virtual event activation and everything like that. So stay tuned, Carol. We got more content definitely coming your way, but reach out to Peter in the meantime before we do that episode, and I'm sure he'd love to chat with you. Peter, oh my gosh. Thank you so much. This was just seriously so phenomenal. I think that the amount of questions that we came in, the fact that everyone stuck around through every single piece of it, it would just show that everyone loved what you had to drop. So thank you so much. On behalf of the audience and behalf of me, thank you so much for coming on the show and dropping some knowledge bombs when it comes to sponsorship.
Thank you very much, Will, for having me. And thank you very much also to the audience for all these questions. I really hope that you liked it. And I hope that it's not going to be the last time that I'm going to be on your show, because it's simply great. And also the way that you're handling it, it's perfect. So thank you very much, Will.
Thank you so much, Peter. And yeah, for everyone who's listening right now, if you're just catching the live stream at the tail end, you can subscribe at www.event-icons.com. You can subscribe to get the whole thing. If you want to re-listen to this episode, that's where you're going to go to catch everything as well. Get it on your favorite podcasting platforms. But you, the audience, you guys are awesome. So I want to say thank you. Thank you to everybody who is watching today. I want to give some shout outs to Julia, to Whitney, Callie, John, Gina, Timothy, Ainsley, Marie Claire, Lynn, Catherine, Patricia, Brittany, MJ, Mark, Christina, Raquel, Shannon, Michelle, Madeline, Gills, everyone as well, and all of our audience across the entire interweb. That was just a quick list of people I could pull through in a quick second. We appreciate all of you tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you guys all. We do this every single week, but we also are doing special episodes and emergency recordings, so make sure you're subscribing. Don't miss another episode. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thank you again, Peter, and we'll see you guys all next time on Event Icons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons.
To catch all the bonus content, resources mentioned, and an invite to our Facebook and LinkedIn groups,
Head to www.event-icons.com. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.